What if I told you the generation that raised millennials, built the internet, and survived both analog and digital chaos is also the most emotionally guarded and misunderstood? Not boomers, not Gen Z, Gen X, the middle child of history, ignored, independent, and quietly powerful. Seriously, if generations were a family, Gen X is the one saying, "I'll handle it myself. You guys carry on." But here's the twist. The way Gen X thinks, loves, works, and reacts is deeply shaped by something most people don't even notice. And once you realize this, you'll never look at your parents, boss, or mentor the same way again. Gen X is often called the latchkey generation. Why? Because during the 1970s and 80s, divorce rates increased, dual-income households became common, parental supervision decreased. So millions of Gen X kids came home to empty houses. They cooked for themselves, solved problems alone, made decisions without guidance. This created early autonomy. In developmental psychology, early autonomy rewires the brain towards self-reliance and internal control, which is why Gen X tends to take initiative without waiting, avoid asking for help, prefer independence over collaboration. Ever met someone who says, "I'll figure it out," even when it's difficult? That's not stubbornness. That's lifelong conditioning. For Gen X, independence isn't a preference, it's their identity. Gen X didn't grow up in a world of stable narratives. They witnessed corporate layoffs and pension failures, political scandals that broke public trust, economic uncertainty. So instead of optimism, they developed skepticism. This is often called learned skepticism, when repeated uncertainty trains the brain to question everything. Tell a Gen Xer, "This is guaranteed success," and watch their reaction. They won't get excited. They'll ask, "What's the catch?" They're not negative thinkers. They're risk-aware thinkers. They naturally evaluate what could go wrong. While younger generations chase possibilities, Gen X quietly calculates probabilities. Gen X grew up in a time when emotional expression wasn't encouraged. Mental health conversations were rare. Vulnerability was often discouraged. Strength meant staying composed. The result? Emotional compression. They don't lack emotion, they contain it. When emotions aren't openly expressed, they tend to surface indirectly through actions, silence, dry humor, or sarcasm. That parent who never says, "I love you," but always shows up when it matters, that's Gen X. Their version of "I care about you" might be fixing your problem before you even ask. Gen X isn't emotionally distant. They simply communicate emotion through responsibility, not words. They value hard work, but unlike previous generations, they don't blindly trust institutions because they saw job instability, the collapse of lifetime employment, the unpredictability of corporate systems. So they developed a resilient career mindset. Studies often show that Gen X is highly adaptable in the workforce, is comfortable switching careers, values practical skills over formal titles. They respect competence, not status. They don't care how popular you are, they care whether you can deliver results. For Gen X, vibes don't pay the bills. They're not against ambition, they're against illusion. Gen X lived through one of the biggest transitions in human history: typewriters to laptops, landlines to smartphones, offline life to digital ecosystems. This makes them the bridge between two worlds. They developed strong cognitive flexibility, the ability to adapt thinking across different environments. Ever noticed how the calmest person during chaos is often from Gen X? Because they've already adapted through massive change. When everything feels uncertain, who's quietly solving the problem? Very often, Gen X. They don't seek attention, they create stability. What if I told you Gen X was raised without a psychological instruction manual? There was a generation that grew up with something no modern child will ever experience again. No guidance system, no emotional roadmap, no constant supervision. They came home to empty houses, made decisions without feedback, and solved life without instructions. This wasn't just independence, it was psychological unprogramming. They didn't learn what to think. They learned how to think in silence. And this creates the first hidden truth. Gen X doesn't process life through input. They process life through absence of input. And that silence didn't just shape thinking, it shaped something deeper, how they feel. Here's the paradox. They don't lack emotion. They lack external emotional projection. From childhood, Expressing emotions wasn't rewarded, so they developed a survival rule. Feel everything internally. Express only what is necessary. So emotions didn't vanish. They were compressed into behavior instead of words. When Gen X doesn't say, "I care," they show it through responsibility, stability, and action. And that's where most generations misread them, because what looks like silence is actually pre-processed emotion. But there's another layer underneath this emotional system. So what does all of this mean for you? Whether you're Gen Z, Millennial, or even Gen X, understanding this generation gives you a powerful advantage. You communicate more effectively. You avoid misjudging behavior. You build stronger, more respectful relationships. That strict parent, that emotionally reserved boss, that practical mentor, they're not cold. They're shaped by experience. And once you understand their psychology, you don't just interpret their actions differently. You respect the depth behind them. Gen X didn't just survive change. They adapted to it without losing their core identity. And in a world that constantly shifts, that might be the rarest strength of all. Understanding people is a real superpower, but very few people actually build it. If you want to be one of them, subscribe to our channel, because here, we don't just talk about generations, we try to understand the minds behind them. And when you start understanding people better, you start making better decisions in life too. If this made sense to you, share it with someone who looks strong on the outside, but is not so easy to understand inside.